Brave New World of Wiretapping by Whitfield Diffie and Susan Landau. As long as people have engaged in private conversations, eavesdroppers have tried to listen in. When important matters were discussed in parlors, people slipped in under the eaves, literally within the eavesdrop, to hear what was being said. When conversations moved to telephones, the wires were tapped. And now that so much human activity takes place in cyberspace, spies have infiltrated that realm as well. Unlike earlier physical frontiers, cyberspace is a human construct. The rules, designs, and investments we make in cyberspace will shape the ways espionage, privacy, and security will interact. Today, there is a clear movement to give intelligence activities a privileged position, building in the capacity of authorities to intercept cyberspace communications. The advantages of this trend for fighting crime and terrorism are obvious. The drawbacks may be less obvious. For one thing, adding such intercept infrastructure would undermine the nimble bottom-up structure of the Internet that has been so congenial to business innovation. Its costs would drive many small U.S. Internet service providers, ISPs, out of business. And the top-down control it would require would threaten the nation's role as a leader and innovator in communications. Furthermore, by putting too much emphasis on the capacity to intercept Internet communications, we may be undermining civil liberties. We may also damage the security of cyberspace and ultimately the security of the nation. If the U.S. builds extensive wiretapping into our communications system, how do we guarantee that the facilities we build will not be misused? Our police and intelligence agencies, through corruption or merely excessive zeal, may use them to spy on Americans in violation of the U.S. Constitution. And with any intercept capability, there is a risk that it could fall into the wrong hands. Criminals, terrorists, and foreign intelligence services may gain access to our surveillance facilities and use them against us. The architectures needed to protect against these two threats are different. Such issues are important enough to merit a broad national debate. Unfortunately, though, the public's ability to participate in the discussion is impeded by the fog of secrecy that surrounds all intelligence, particularly message interception, signals intelligence. A brief history of wiretapping. To understand the current controversy over wiretapping, one must understand the history of communications technology. From the development of the telephone in the 19th century until the past decade or two, remote voice communications were carried almost exclusively by circuit-switched systems. When one person picked up the phone to call another, one or more telephone switches along the way would connect their wires so that a continuous circuit would be formed. This circuit would persist for the duration of the call, after which the switches would disconnect the wires, freeing resources to handle other calls. Call switching was essentially the only thing that telephone switches did. Other services associated with the telephone, call forwarding and message taking, for example, were handled by human operators. Wiretapping has had an on-and-off legal history in the U.S. The earliest wiretaps were simply extra wires connected to the line between the telephone company's central office and the subscriber that carried the signal to a pair of earphones and a recorder. Later on, wiretaps were installed at the central office on the frames that held the incoming wires. At first, the courts held that a wiretap does not constitute a search when it involves no trespass, but over time that viewpoint changed. In 1967, the U.S. Supreme Court decided in the case of Katz versus the United States that the interception of communications is indeed a search and that a warrant is required. This decision prompted Congress in 1968 to pass a law providing for wiretap warrants in criminal investigations. But Congress's action left the use of wiretapping for foreign intelligence in legal limbo. Congressional investigations that followed the 1972 Watergate break-in uncovered a history of presidential operations that had employed and, as it turned out, abused the practice, spying on peaceful domestic political organizations, as well as hostile foreign ones. So in 1978, Congress passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, which took the controversial step of creating a secret federal court for issuing wiretap warrants. Most of the surveillance of communications for foreign intelligence purposes lay outside the scope of the wiretapping law because this activity had primarily involved the interception of radio signals rather than physical intrusions into phone systems. When operating in other countries, American intelligence services could not place wiretaps on phone lines as easily as they could in the U.S. Another important distinction between domestic and foreign communications surveillance is scale. Inside the U.S., wiretapping has traditionally been regarded as an extreme investigative technique, something to be applied only to very serious crimes. Outside the country, though, the interception of communications is big business. The National Security Agency, NSA, spends billions of dollars every year intercepting foreign communications from ground bases, ships, airplanes, and satellites. But the most important differences are procedural. Within the U.S., the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution guarantees the right of the people to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. The logic of a reasonable search is that law enforcement officers must make an unprivileged observation, that is, one that does not invade the suspect's privacy, whose results give them probable cause with which they can approach the courts for a search warrant. What they are not permitted to do, in either physical searches or wiretaps, is to search first and then use what they find as evidence that the search was legitimate. This procedure, however, is exactly what intelligence agents do, except that they usually do not employ their results to prosecute criminals. An intelligence officer relies on professional judgment and available information to make the decision to spy on a foreign target. The operation will then be judged as a success or failure depending on what intelligence was obtained and what resources were expended. The rules established in FISA make three fundamental distinctions between U.S. persons, citizens, legal residents, and American corporations, and foreigners, between communications inside and outside the U.S., and between wired and wireless communications. Briefly, wired communications entirely within the U.S. are protected. Intercepting them requires a warrant. But radio communications that include people outside the country are protected only if the signal is intercepted in the U.S. and the government's target is a particular known U.S. person who is in the country at the time. Until recently, whenever the FISA rules applied, they imposed a burden similar to that imposed by ordinary criminal law. To seek a warrant, an intelligence agency had to specify a particular location, telecommunications channel, or person, and explain why the target should be subject to surveillance. Operating foreign intelligence style, intercepting communications and then using the recorded conversations to justify the interception, was not permitted. Almost accidentally, the rules set by FISA included an important loophole that Congress had intended to be only temporary. Radio communications involving parties who were not U.S. persons could be intercepted from inside the U.S. without warrants. At the time FISA was passed, and for many years thereafter, the radio exemption was a great boon to the intelligence community. Satellite radio relays had revolutionized international communications in the 1960s and 1970s and carried most of the phone calls entering and leaving the country. Radio communications that were partly or completely among parties outside the U.S. were legally and physically vulnerable to interception by NSA antennas at places such as Yakima, Washington, and Vint Hill Farms in Virginia. Minimization. One of the important procedural differences between law enforcement, wiretapping, and surveillance for foreign intelligence lies in the practice of minimization, avoiding the collection of communications other than the targeted ones. A wiretap phone line, for example, may be used by several people, some of whom are not the targets of the investigation. U.S. law requires the police to listen to a tapped conversation at the same time they record it, and to stop the surveillance when the subjects are not discussing criminal activities. In foreign intelligence gathering, the minimization rules are generally not so rigid, but because so many signals can be intercepted and analyzed, far more traffic must be discarded as irrelevant. In the 1970s, a new transmission medium emerged as an alternative for long-haul communications. Optical fibers, long, thin strands of glass that carry signals via laser light, offer great advantages in communicating between fixed locations. Fiber lines have tremendous capacity. They are not plagued by the quarter-second delay that slows satellite relays. They are intrinsically more secure than radio. and for a combination of technical and business reasons, they have become very cheap. From the 1990s onward, the vast majority of communications from one fixed location to another have moved by fiber. Because fiber communications are wired, U.S. law gives them greater protection. The intelligence community could not intercept these communications as freely as they could radio traffic, and the FISA rules began to chafe. A particularly sensitive issue for intelligence agencies was the so-called transit traffic. Some 20% of the communications carried on U.S. networks originate and terminate outside the country, moving between Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Transit traffic is not a new phenomenon. It was already present in the satellite era. But under FISA rules, the interception of fiber communications at points inside the U.S. required a warrant. This requirement upset the standard processes of intelligence agents who were unaccustomed to seeking probable cause before initiating surveillance. At about the same time, computer-based switching systems began to replace the traditional electromechanical switches in U.S. telephone networks. This computerization paved the way for services such as automated call forwarding and answering systems, which unintentionally but effectively bypassed standard wiretapping techniques. Suppose that a caller to a wiretap phone left a message with an answering service provided by the telephone company. If the target of the investigation checked his messages from a phone other than his own, the communication would never travel over the tapped line, and thus would not be intercepted. Congress responded in 1994 with the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, CALEA, which requires telecommunications companies to make it possible for the government to tap all the communications of a targeted subscriber, no matter what automated services the subscriber uses. In addition to mandating an improvement in the quality of information that can be obtained from wiretaps, CALEA obliged telecommunications carriers to be able to execute far more simultaneous wiretaps than had previously been possible. Tapping the net. CALEA was passed just as large numbers of people began using the Internet, which employs a communications method that is entirely different from circuit-switched telephony. Internet users send information in small packets, each of which carries a destination address and a return address, just like a letter in the postal system. With circuit switching, a brief telephone call incurs the same setup costs as a long one, so making a call to send only a few words is uneconomical. But on a packet-switched network, short messages are cheap, and shorter messages are cheaper. Web browsing is possible because Internet connections can be used briefly and discarded. Each time you click on a web link, you establish a new connection. In the era of circuit-switched communications, wiretapping worked because telephone instruments, numbers, and users were bound closely together. A telephone was hard to move, and a new telephone number was hard to get. An organization's messages moved on the same channels for long periods, so it was easy to intercept them repeatedly. Computerized switching and the Internet have made surveillance much more challenging. Today, people can easily get new telephone numbers as well as email addresses, instant messaging handles, and other identifiers. And the advent of Voice over Internet Protocol, VoIP, the standard that allows the transmission of voice communications over packet-switched networks, has further decentralized control of the communications infrastructure. In a VoIP system, such as the popular Skype service, for example, the setting up of phone calls and the transmission of traffic are entirely separate. If CALEA, as interpreted literally, were applied to decentralized VoIP services, the provider would be required to intercept targeted customers' phone calls and relay them to the government, but might be totally incapable of complying with such a demand. Consider a typical VoIP call running between the laptop computers of two people, both of whom are traveling. Alice initiates the call from a lounge at O'Hare Airport in Chicago, and Bob receives it at a hotel bar in San Francisco. The VoIP provider's role in the process is limited. It discovers the Internet Protocol, IP addresses, through which Alice and Bob are connected, and communicates each person's address to the other's computer. After the setup is completed, the VoIP provider plays no further role. Instead, the actual voice conversation is carried by the Internet service providers, ISPs, through which Alice and Bob access the Internet, together with other Internet carriers to which those ISPs are connected. In this environment, a government agency might have to serve wiretap warrants on many telecommunications carriers just to monitor a single target. Suppose we imagine a CALEA-style intercept regime that could capture a VoIP call. It must begin with an order to the VoIP provider targeting either Alice or Bob. When law enforcement agents receive word from the provider that the target is engaged in a call, they must consider the IP addresses of Alice and Bob and send an intercept warrant to one or more ISPs at which the call can be intercepted. The ISPs must be prepared to accept, authenticate, and implement the warrant in real time. One problem with this scenario is that only ISPs in the U.S. and possibly some in cooperating countries would be required to honor the warrant. A more serious difficulty is the massive security problem that such an arrangement would present. Anyone who could penetrate an ISP's wiretap function would be able to spy on its subscribers at will. CALEA recognized the difference between traditional telephony and the Internet and exempted the Internet, referred to as information services, from the provisions of the new law. Yet in 2004, despite that distinction, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration responded to the challenge of monitoring Internet communications by proposing that providers of broadband Internet access be required to comply with the CALEA requirements. The Federal Communications Commission and the courts have so far supported law enforcement in extending CALEA to interconnected VoIP, the form most like traditional telephony, relying on a provision of CALEA that refers to services that are a substantial replacement for the telephone system. This proposal, if adopted, would be the first step on a road leading to dangers not present in conventional wiretapping. In particular, the government's actions threaten the continued growth of the Internet, which has become a hotbed of innovation as a consequence of its distributed control and loose connectivity. Unlike a telephone carrier's network, the Internet is not centrally planned and managed. The addition of a new service, such as call forwarding in the telephone system, typically takes years of planning and development. But an Internet entrepreneur can start a new business in a garage or dorm room using nothing but a home computer and a broadband connection. If law enforcement succeeds in mandating interception facilities for every Internet carrier, the industry as a whole could be pushed back into the Procrustean bed of conventional telecommunications. To incorporate extensive surveillance capabilities, new Internet services would have to be developed in long cycles dependent on federal approval. In a century in which the great opportunities lie in information-based businesses, Americans must do everything possible to foster innovation rather than stifling it. If we do not, we may fall behind countries that follow a different course. Such an outcome would represent a long-term threat to national security. Another threat is more immediate. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, no opponent has had the ability to spy on U.S. communications with anything approximating comprehensive coverage. The Soviets had fleets of trawlers patrolling both coasts of the U.S. diplomatic facilities in major American cities, satellites overhead, and ground bases such as the Lourdes facility near Havana. Their capabilities in signals intelligence were second to none. In comparison, the current opponents we most fear, such as Al-Qaeda, and even major nations such as China, have no such ability. They are, however, trying to achieve it, and building wiretapping into the Internet might give it to them. Computers would control the intercept devices, and those computers themselves would be controlled remotely. Such systems could be just as much subject to capture as websites and personal computers. The government's proposed interception policies must be judged in the light of such vast and uncertain dangers. Cyber wars. The administration of President George W. Bush relaxed some of the 30-year-old restrictions on communications surveillance mandated by FISA. In 2007, Congress, under intense pressure from the White House, passed the Protect America Act, PAA, which amended FISA by expanding the radio exemption to cover all communications. The law provided that any communication reasonably believed to have a participant outside the U.S. could be intercepted without a warrant. Given the degree to which business services in the U.S. are being outsourced to overseas providers, the new law made a large fraction of American commercial and personal telecommunications activities subject to monitoring. Congress was sufficiently nervous about this course of action that it provided for PAA to expire in 2008. After months of controversy, Congress passed a bill fundamentally expanding the executive branch's wiretapping authority, and reducing the FISA court's role in international cases to reviewing the general procedures of a proposed wiretap rather than the specifics of a case. Political debate over the bill, however, did not center on wiretapping authority, as one might expect for a sweeping change. Most attention focused instead on giving retroactive immunity for past illegal wiretapping. In early 2008, the administration offered a new rationale for expanding communication surveillance, securing the Internet. The current state of Internet security is indeed abysmal. Most computers cannot protect themselves from penetration by malware, software designed to infiltrate and damage computer systems, and a substantial fraction of the computers linked to the Internet are under the control of parties other than their owners. These machines have been surreptitiously captured and organized into botnets, whose computing power is then resold in a kind of electronic slave trade. In response to the failure of traditional defensive approaches, President Bush signed a national security directive in January authorizing a cyber initiative. Most of the initiative is secret, but its initial move, extensive surveillance of the substantial amount of Internet traffic that moves in and out of the U.S. government, is too sweeping to be concealed. To facilitate the surveillance, the administration plans to reduce the number of connections between government agencies and the Internet from thousands to fewer than 100, and that requires changing or retiring thousands of IP addresses. The cyber initiative captures the dilemma of signals intelligence perfectly. A system that monitors federal communications for signs of foreign intrusion will also capture all the legitimate communications that Americans have with their government. The administration is seeking the power to intercept American communications using the same tactics long employed in foreign intelligence gathering. That is, without having to go to the courts for warrants and describe in advance whose communications it intends to intercept. The advocates of expanded surveillance have valid concerns. Not only do we face opponents who are not tied to particular nations and can move freely in and out of the U.S., we also have a critical cybersecurity problem. The Internet is swiftly becoming the primary medium for both commercial and government business, as well as the preferred communications method for many individuals. Its security problems are analogous to having the roads overrun with bandits or the sea lanes controlled by pirates. Under these circumstances, it is not surprising to find the government seeking to patrol the Internet, just as the nation's police and armed services have patrolled the roads or the high seas in the past. But policing the Internet as opposed to securing the computers that populate it may be a treacherous remedy. Will the government's monitoring tools be any more secure than the network they're trying to protect? If not, we run the risk that the surveillance facilities will be subverted or actually used against the U.S. The security problems that plague the Internet may beset the computers that will do the policing as much as the computers being policed. If the government expands spying on the Internet without solving the underlying computer security problems, we are courting disaster. The inherent dangers are made worse by the secrecy surrounding the government's initiatives. One casualty of recent approaches to communications interception has been what might be called the two-organization rule. The security of many crucial systems, such as those controlling nuclear weapons, relies on the requirement that critical actions be taken by two people simultaneously. Until recently, federal law mandated a similar approach to wiretapping, allowing the government to issue wiretap orders, but requiring the phone companies to install the taps. Under this arrangement, a phone company would be reluctant to act on a wiretap order it suspected was illegal, because its compliance would make it vulnerable to both prosecution and civil liability. Eliminating the role of the phone companies removes an important safeguard. If we follow this course, we may create a regime entirely out of view of Congress, the courts, and the press, and perhaps entirely out of control. The distance our world has moved into cyberspace in the past century is minuscule compared with the distance it will move in the next. We are in the process of building the world in which future humans will live, as surely as the first city dwellers did 5,000 years ago. Communication is fundamental to our species. Private communication is fundamental to both our national security and our democracy. Our challenge is to maintain this privacy in the midst of new communications technologies and serious national security threats. But it is critical to make choices that preserve privacy, communication security, and the ability to innovate. Otherwise, all hope of having a free society will vanish. Originally published, Scientific American 299, Volume 3, 56-63, September 2008. Tag, You're It, by Catherine Albrecht. If you live in a state bordering Canada or Mexico, you may soon be given an opportunity to carry a very high-tech item, a remotely readable driver's license. Designed to identify U.S. citizens as they approach the nation's borders, the cards are being promoted by the Department of Homeland Security as a way to save time and simplify border crossings. But if you care about your safety and privacy as much as convenience, you might want to think twice before signing up. The new licenses come equipped with radio frequency identification, RFID tags, that can be read right through a wallet, pocket, or purse from as far away as 30 feet. Each tag incorporates a tiny microchip encoded with a unique identification number. As the bearer approaches a border station, radio energy broadcast by a reader device is picked up by an antenna connected to the chip, causing it to emit the ID number. By the time the license holder reaches the border agent, the number has already been fed into a Homeland Security database, and the traveler's photograph and other details are displayed on the agent's screen. Although such enhanced driver's licenses remain voluntary in the states that offer them, privacy and security experts are concerned that those who sign up for the cards are unaware of the risk. Anyone with a readily available reader device, unscrupulous marketers, government agents, stalkers, thieves, and just plain snoops, can also access the data on the licenses to remotely track people without their knowledge or consent. What is more, once the tag's ID number is associated with an individual's identity, for example, when the person carrying the license makes a credit card transaction, the radio tag becomes a proxy for that individual. And the driver's licenses are just the latest addition to a growing array of tagged items that consumers might be wearing or carrying around, such as transit and toll passes, office key cards, school IDs, contactless credit cards, clothing, phones, and even groceries. RFID tags have been likened to barcodes that broadcast their information, and the comparison is apt in the sense that the tiny devices have been used mainly for identifying parts and inventory, including cattle, as they make their way through supply chains. Instead of having to scan every individual item's Universal Product Code, UPC, a warehouse worker can register the contents of an entire pallet of, say, paper towels by scanning the unique serial number encoded in the attached RFID tag. That number is associated in the central database with a detailed list of the pallet's contents. But people are not paper products. During the past decade, a shift toward embedding chips in individual consumer goods, and now official identity documents, has created a new set of privacy and security problems, precisely because RFID is such a powerful tracking technology. Very little security is built into the tags themselves, and existing laws offer people scant protection from being surreptitiously tracked and profiled while living an increasingly tagged life. Beyond barcodes. The first radio tags identified military aircraft as friend or foe during World War II, but it was not until the late 1980s that similar tags became the basis of electronic toll collection systems, such as E.L.V.I.S along the East Coast. And in 1999, corporations began considering the tag's potential for tracking millions of individual objects. In that year, Procter & Gamble and Gillette, which have since merged to become the world's largest consumer product manufacturing company, formed a consortium with Massachusetts Institute of Technology engineers called the Auto ID Center to develop RFID tags that would be small, efficient, and cheap enough to eventually replace the UPC barcode on everyday consumer products. By 2003, the group had developed a working version of the technology and attracted investment from more than 100 companies and government agencies. The tag's promoters promised the tiny chips would revolutionize inventory management and counterfeiting prevention. To kickstart government adoption of the technology, the General Services Administration, GSA, a federal bureau that manages purchasing for other government institutions, issued a memo in 2004 urging the heads of all federal agencies to consider action that can be taken to advance the RFID industry. Suddenly, virtually every agency, from the Social Security Administration to the Food and Drug Administration, began announcing RFID trials. During the same period, similar initiatives were underway around the world. In 2003, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, a United Nations agency that sets global passport standards, endorsed the use of RFID tags in passports. ICAO now calls for their use in all scannable e-passports. Today, dozens of countries, including the U.S., issue e-passports with RFID tags embedded in their covers. Since their debut, the new passports have been controversial on both privacy and security grounds. In a 2006 report, one ICAO official promised that encryption measures would provide a level of protection that should reassure the most anxious passport holder that his personal data cannot be read without his knowledge. Security experts quickly proved otherwise. In 2007, British security consultant Adam Lowry cracked the encryption code on a UK passport and skimmed or remotely read its personal information while it was still sealed in its mailing envelope. Around the same time, German security consultant Lucas Grunwald copied the data from a German passport's embedded chip and encoded it into a different RFID tag to create a forged document that could fool an electronic passport reader. Investigators at Charles University in Prague, finding similar vulnerabilities in Czech e-passports, wrote that it was a bit surprising to meet an implementation that actually encourages rather than eliminates security attacks. Yet these demonstrated security problems have not slowed the adoption of RFID. On the contrary, the technology is being deployed for domestic ID cards around the world. Malaysia has issued some 25 million contactless national identity cards. Qatar is issuing one that stores the cardholder's fingerprint in addition to personal information. And in what industry observers are calling the single largest RFID project in the world, the Chinese government is spending $6 billion to roll out RFID-based national IDs to nearly 1 billion citizens and residents. There is an important difference, however, between other nations' RFID-based ID cards and Homeland Security's new driver's licenses. Most countries' contactless national IDs and e-passports have adopted an RFID tag that meets an industry standard known as ISO 14443, which was developed specifically for identification and payment cards, and has a degree of security and privacy protection built in. In contrast, U.S. border cards use an RFID standard known as EPC Global Gen 2, a technology that was designed to track products in warehouses, where the goal is not security, but maximum ease of readability. Whereas the ISO 14443 standard includes rudimentary encryption and requires tags to be close to a scanner to be read, a distance measured in inches rather than feet, Gen 2 tags typically have no encryption and only minimal data safeguards. To skim the data from an encrypted ISO 14443 chip, you have to crack the encryption code, but no special skills are required to skim a Gen 2 tag. All you need is any Gen 2 reader. Such readers can be purchased readily and are in common use in warehouses worldwide. A hacker or criminal armed with one could skim a border card through a purse, across a room, even through a wall. As of April 2008, more than 35,000 Washington state motorists had signed up for enhanced driver's licenses, and other border states, including Arizona, Michigan, and Vermont, have agreed to participate in the program. New York State will begin making the new licenses available to its residents after Labor Day. But the possibility that the security of such cards could be compromised is just one reason for concern. Even if tighter data protection measures could someday prevent unauthorized access to RFID card data, many privacy advocates worry that remotely readable identity documents could be abused by governments that wish to tightly monitor and control their citizens. China's national ID cards, for instance, are encoded with what most people would consider a shocking amount of personal information, including health and reproductive history, employment status, religion, ethnicity, and even the name and phone number of each cardholder's landlord. More ominous still, the cards are part of a larger project to blanket Chinese cities with state-of-the-art surveillance technologies. Michael Lin, a vice president for China Public Security Technology, a private company providing the RFID cards for the program, unflinchingly described them to the New York Times as a way for the government to control the population in the future. And even if other governments do not take advantage of the surveillance potential inherent in the new ID cards, ample evidence suggests that data-hungry corporations will. voluntary guidelines. EPC Global Inc., an organization that sets standards for RFID tags, also offers principles for their use as electronic product codes in consumer goods. Notice, consumers will be given clear notice of the presence of EPC on products or their packaging through the use of an EPC logo or other identifier. Choice. Consumers will be informed of the choices to remove or disable EPC tags from the products they acquire. Education. Companies using EPC tags will familiarize consumers with the EPC logo and help them understand the technology. Records. Consumer data associated with tags will be collected, used, maintained, stored, and protected by EPC Global member companies in compliance with applicable laws. Living a tagged life. If the idea that corporations might want to use RFID tags to spy on individuals sounds far-fetched, it is worth considering an IBM patent filed in 2001 and granted in 2006. The patent describes exactly how the cards can be used for tracking and profiling, even if access to official databases is unavailable or strictly limited. Entitled Identification and Tracking of Persons Using RFID-Tagged Items in Store Environments, it chillingly details RFID's potential for surveillance in a world where networked RFID readers called person tracking units would be incorporated virtually everywhere people go. In shopping malls, airports, train stations, bus stations, elevators, trains, airplanes, restrooms, sports arenas, libraries, theaters, and museums to closely monitor people's movements. According to the patent, here's how it would work in a retail environment. An RFID tag scanner located in the desired tracking location scans the RFID tags on a person. As that person moves around the store, different RFID tag scanners located throughout the store can pick up radio signals from the RFID tags carried on that person, and the movement of that person is tracked based on these detections. The person tracking unit may keep records of different locations where the person is visited, as well as the visitation times. The fact that no personal data are stored in the RFID tag does not present a problem, IBM explains, because the personal information will be obtained when the person uses his or her credit card, bank card, shopper card, or the like. The link between the unique RFID number of the tag and a person's identity needs to be made only once for the card to serve as a proxy for the person thereafter. Although IBM envisioned tracking people via miniature tags in consumer goods, with today's RFID border cards, there is no need to wait for such individual product tags to become widespread. Washington's new driver's licenses would be ideally suited to the in-store tracking application because they can already be read by Gen 2 inventory scanners in use today at stores such as Walmart, Dillard's, and American Apparel. A tracking infrastructure will become increasingly fruitful to marketers as more people begin carrying and even wearing RFID-tagged items. At present, tens of millions of contactless credit and ATM cards containing RFID tags are in circulation, along with millions of employee access badges. RFID-based public transit passes, widely used in Europe and Japan, are also coming to U.S. cities. IBM's person tracking unit is still only a patent, but an English amusement park called Alton Towers provides a living illustration of RFID's tracking potential. On entering the park, each visitor is offered an RFID wristband encoded with a unique ID number. As people enjoy the attractions, a network of RFID readers placed strategically throughout the park detects each wristband as it comes within range and triggers nearby video cameras. Candid footage of each individual is stored in a file labeled with the wristband ID number, then made available to the customer on a keepsake DVD at the end of the day. Protecting the public. If RFID tags can enable an amusement park to capture detailed, personalized videos of thousands of people a day, imagine what a determined government could do, not to mention marketers or criminals. That is why my colleagues in the privacy community and I have so firmly opposed the use of RFID in government-issued identity documents or individual consumer items. As far back as 2003, my organization, Caspian, Consumers Against Supermarket Privacy Invasion and Numbering, along with the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the American Civil Liberties Union, and 40 other leading privacy and civil liberties advocates and organizations, recognize this threat and issued a position paper that condemned the tracking of human beings with RFID as inappropriate. In response to these concerns, dozens of U.S. states have introduced RFID consumer protection bills, which have all been either killed or gutted by heavy opposition from lobbyists for the RFID industry. When the New Hampshire Senate voted on a bill that would have imposed tough regulations on RFID in 2006, a last-minute floor amendment replaced it with a 2-year study instead. I was appointed by the governor to serve on the resulting commission. That same year, a California bill that would have prohibited the use of RFID in government-issued documents passed both houses of the legislature, only to be vetoed by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. On the federal level, no high-profile consumer protection bills related to RFID have been passed. Instead, in 2005, the Senate Republican High-Tech Task Force praised RFID applications as exciting new technologies with tremendous promise for our economy, and vowed to protect RFID from regulation or legislation. In the European Union, regulators are at least examining the situation. The European Commission, the executive arm of the EU, has acknowledged the potential for serious privacy problems with RFID and opened a public comment period earlier this year. As of July 2008, when this issue went to press, recommendations stemming from the public comments were set to be released later in the summer, but expectations for any consumer privacy regulations were low. In a March 2007 speech, EU Commissioner for Information Society and Media, Viviane Reding, announced that the Commission would not regulate RFID, but instead would allow businesses to regulate themselves. "I'm here to tell you that on RFIDs there is not going to be a regulation," she said. "My view is that we should under-regulate rather than over-regulate, so that this sector can take off." Unfortunately, industry self-regulation has little force when it comes to protecting the public from RFID risks. EPC Global, the industry body that now sets technical standards for RFID tags, also produced a set of guidelines for the use of the chips in retail. The organization's recommendations require, among other things, notice to consumers whenever products contain RFID tags, for instance in the form of a recognizable RFID logo. Yet when Checkpoint Systems, a member company of EPC Global, designed RFID tags to be hidden in the soles of shoes, in clear violation of the organization's own provisions, Mike Miranda, then president of EPC Global, told me that since the guidelines were voluntary, there was nothing he or his organization could do about it. The Washington State Department of Licensing reassures citizens that their personal information is safe because the RFID tag in an enhanced driver's license doesn't have a power source and doesn't contain any personal identifying information, even though those facts have no bearing on whether the card can be used for tracking. For some people, a false sense of assurance provided by such official modifications could be dangerous. The National Network to End Domestic Violence, a group that vocally opposes the use of RFID and identity documents in consumer products, has submitted legislative testimony describing how abusers could use the technology to stalk and monitor their victims. Meanwhile, the RFID train is barreling forward. Gigi Zink, a spokesperson at Washington's licensing agency, recently confirmed that there are 10,000 enhanced licenses on the street now that people are actually carrying. That's a lot of potential for abuse, and it will only grow. The state recently mustered a half-hearted response, passing a law that designates the unauthorized reading of a tag for the purpose of fraud, identity theft, or for any other illegal purpose as a Class C felony, subject to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Nowhere in the law does it say, however, that scanning for other purposes, such as marketing, or perhaps to control the population, is prohibited. We ignore these risks at our peril. Originally published, Scientific American 299, Volume 3, 72-77, September 2008. Malware Goes Mobile, by Mikko Hyppönen. The day the computer security community had anticipated for years finally arrived in June 2004. I and other researchers who study malicious forms of software knew that it was only a matter of time until such malware appeared on mobile phones as well. As cell phones have evolved into smartphones, able to download programs from the Internet and share software with one another through short-range Bluetooth connections, worldwide multimedia messaging service, MMS communications, and memory cards, The device's novel capabilities have created new vulnerabilities. Scoundrels were bound to find the weaknesses and exploit them for mischief, or worse, for criminal gain. Sure enough, 3 summers ago, security experts found the first rogue program written specifically for smartphones. Dubbed CYBER, it was a classic proof-of-concept virus, clearly created to capture bragging rights. It caused no damage to an infected device, other than running down the phone's battery as the virus tried to copy itself to another smartphone by opening a Bluetooth connection. The anonymous author, most likely somewhere in Spain, chose to post CYBER on a website rather than releasing it into the wild. But within 2 months, other scofflaws had turned it loose in Southeast Asia. It soon spread worldwide. Even though we had been on the lookout for viruses such as CYBER, security experts were not fully prepared to deal with it. As soon as the alert was sounded, my coworkers and I at F-Secure, a computer security firm, started inspecting the new virus, which was a type known as a worm. But we had no safe place to study it. Unlike a computer virus that can be observed and dissected on a machine that is disconnected from any network, wireless malware can spread, in some cases even make transoceanic leaps, the moment the infected phone is powered up. So we took 4 cell phones hit by CYBER to the basement bomb shelter in our office building and posted a guard at the door before turning them on, lest an unsuspecting employee walk in and catch the bug. Later that year, F-Secure built 2 aluminum and copper-encased laboratories impenetrable to radio waves to study this contagious new form of malware. Although the initial version of CYBER was relatively innocuous, some unscrupulous malware writers rushed to modify it into forms that are more virulent and damaging, while others began crafting novel kinds of attacks. Mobile viruses on the loose now can completely disable a phone, delete the data on it, or force the device to send costly messages to premium price numbers. Within 2 years, the number of viruses targeting smartphones soared from 1 to more than 200. A rate of growth that roughly paralleled that of computer viruses in the first 2 years after the first PC virus, called Brain, was released in 1986. Despite Herculean efforts to rein it in, PC malware continues at a gallop. More than 200,000 forms have been identified so far, and today an unprotected PC is often infected within minutes of connecting to the Internet. The economic costs of the 20-year onslaught have been steep, and they are spiraling higher as old-school malware written for glory has given way to a new era of crimeware designed for spamming, data theft, or extortion. Mobile malware, though little more than a nuisance today, could quickly escalate into an even more formidable problem than PC malware in the years ahead unless the security community, cellular network operators, smartphone designers, and phone users all work together to hold it in check. The history of PC malware is humbling, but it offers lessons that will help us to anticipate some of the ways in which mobile virus writers will strike next, and take steps to thwart them. A rising tide. In 1988, many computer experts dismissed viruses as inconsequential novelties. That assessment proved regrettably naive. For mobile malware, the time is now 1988, and we have a brief window in which to act to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. One such mistake was to underestimate how quickly malware would grow in prevalence, diversity, and sophistication. Prevalence is a function of both the population of potential hosts for virtual pathogens and of their rate of infection. The target population for malicious mobile software is enormous and growing by leaps. There are now more than 2 billion mobile phones in the world. It is true that the great majority of these are older cell phones running closed proprietary operating systems that are largely immune from viral infection. But customers are quickly abandoning these devices for newer generations of smartphones that run more open operating systems, web browsers, email, and other messaging clients, and that contain flash memory card readers and short-range Bluetooth radios. Each of these features offers a conduit through which malware can propagate. Bluetooth, for example, allows certain mobile worms to spread among vulnerable phones by mere proximity, almost like the influenza virus. A Bluetooth-equipped smartphone can identify and exchange files with other Bluetooth devices from a distance of 10 meters or more. As victims travel, their phones can leave a trail of infected bystanders in their wake, and any event that attracts a large crowd presents a perfect breeding ground for Bluetooth viruses. A particularly nasty form of CYBER, for example, spread so rapidly through the audience at the 2005 World Track and Field Championships in Helsinki that stadium operators flashed warnings on the big screen. Most smartphones can put Bluetooth into a non-discoverable mode that protects them from invasion by worms. But few users avail themselves of this feature. While giving a talk at a computer security conference this spring, I conducted a quick scan of the room and found that almost half the professionals in the audience had left the Bluetooth radios on their phones wide open. The proportion is even higher among the general population, so these devices offer a disturbingly effective vector for invisible parasites. And this host population is growing rapidly. Smartphones got started as expensive business models, but their popularity with consumers has recently taken off. With each generation, the devices accrete more PC-like functionality. At the same time that smartphones have begun sporting features such as video cameras, GPS navigation, and MP3 players, their prices have dropped, subsidized in part by network operators, who hope the new capabilities will encourage customers to spend more on cellular services. Manufacturers sold more than 40 million smartphones last year, and industry analysts expect to see 350 million units in service by 2009. In the medium term, these devices may be adopted most quickly in emerging economies, where computer ownership is still relatively low. Research by Canalys, a high-tech consultancy near Reading, England, found that smartphone sales in the first quarter of this year grew twice as fast in Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East as they did in Western Europe. Industry analysts predict that some developing nations will choose to forgo construction of a wired Internet infrastructure and will instead upgrade their digital wireless networks and promote smartphones as affordable computers. The wireless route can be much less expensive to construct and maintain and, from a sensor's perspective, much easier to monitor and control. If these forecasts prove accurate, smartphones could in the very near future make up most of the world's computers, and huge populations of users who have little or no experience with computers could soon be surfing the web and sharing files with their phones. They would present mobile malware creators with an irresistibly large and unwary target. One lesson from PC viruses is that the bigger the target, the bigger the attraction for nefarious programmers. The vast majority of desktop malware works only on the ubiquitous Microsoft Windows operating system. For the same reason, nearly all the mobile worms and Trojan horses released so far infect the Symbian operating system, which runs some 70% of smartphones worldwide, including phones made by Nokia, Samsung, Sony Ericsson, and Motorola. In contrast, only a few varieties of malware infect Microsoft's Pocket PC or Windows Mobile, Palm's Trio, or Research in Motion's BlackBerry devices. The Symbian bias partly explains why mobile malware is currently most prevalent in Europe and Southeast Asia, where Symbian is commonplace but is rarer in North America, Japan, and South Korea. Cellular operators in North America have spread their markets more equally across the various platforms. The Japanese and Korean markets were dominated for a long time by Linux-based phones, and carriers there heavily restrict the types of applications that users can install on their phones. Carriers would be wise to begin educating cellular customers now about how to identify and avoid mobile viruses, rather than waiting until these infections become epidemic. Phone makers should install antivirus software by default, just as PC manufacturers now do. And regulators and phone companies can also help avoid the monoculture problem that plagues PCs by encouraging a diverse ecosystem for smartphones, in which no single variety of software dominates the market. A malware primer. Phishing scam. Fraudulent web page, email, or text message that entices the unwary to reveal passwords, financial details, or other private data. Spyware. Software that reveals private information about the user or computer system to eavesdroppers. Trojan horse. a program that purports to be useful but actually harbors hidden malicious code. Virus. Originally, computer code that inserts itself into another program and replicates when the host software runs. Now often used as a generic term that also includes Trojan horses and worms. Worm. Self-replicating code that automatically spreads across a network. From kicks to crime. Diversity cuts both ways, of course. Over time, malware too inevitably mutates into new species that attack and subvert useful software in an ever-widening variety of ways. On the PC, the early viruses were eventually joined by Trojans, worms, spyware, and most recently, phishing attacks. Since 2003, much of the new malware appearing on PCs has been written for profit rather than for mere mischief. Organized gangs of cybercriminals now operate all over the world. Thieves use crimeware to make money by stealing financial data, business secrets, or computer resources. Spammers assemble botnets of hacked machines to forward bulk email and phishing scams. And blackmailers extort money with threats of digital destruction or virtual blockades that shut down a company's web or email servers. In some countries, cybercriminals are virtually untouchable because authorities lack the technical expertise, resources, or will to enforce laws against computer crimes. As for-profit virus writing increases, the likelihood of severe mobile malware attacks escalates as well. After all, every phone call placed and every text or multimedia message sent is also a financial transaction. That opens up a flood of potential earning opportunities for profiteer hackers and virus authors. Computers do not have a built-in billing system. Mobile phones do. The bad guys will exploit this feature before long. Indeed, at least one already has. A Trojan called Red Browser sends a continuous stream of text messages from any phone it infects to a number in Russia until the user disables the phone. Each message is charged at a premium rate of about $5, resulting in huge bills for the unfortunate victims. Some cellular carriers hold their customers liable for such unauthorized transactions, and when they do, the criminals who own the premium number collect the premium fees. Luckily, Red Browser has so far only been spotted inside Russia. Meanwhile, service providers in North American markets are beginning to introduce mobile wallets. Customers will be able to use their phones to transfer funds from their accounts to others by sending specially formatted text messages. PayPal, a digital payments firm, offers a similar service that allows users to buy items using their phones. Such services could be of intense interest to malware authors. With both the sophistication of mobile malware and the technological and financial capabilities of mobile phones on the rise, we will have to move rapidly in the next couple of years. Actions now could thwart mobile malware while it is in its infancy, and while smartphone services are still fairly flexible in their design. But that window of opportunity will not stay open for long. More dangers ahead. The reason for haste is clear when one considers all the ways that hackers could, but have yet to, wreak havoc with smartphones. On personal computers, many of the worst culprits spread via email or force infected machines to spew spam onto the internet. None of the miscreant programs released so far for smartphones capitalize on the device's ability to send email. It is only a matter of time until malware appears that can propagate as email attachments or can turn phones into spam-sending robots. Spyware is another mushrooming problem in the PC arena, and the potential for surreptitious software on phones to destroy privacy is obvious. Only a handful of such programs have been seen as yet. One called FlexiSpy periodically and invisibly sends a log of phone calls and multimedia messages, both sent and received, to a third party. The eavesdropper needs to gain physical access to the phone to download and install the spying program. It may not be long, however, before hackers incorporate this kind of eavesdropping behavior into viruses that replicate on their own. With new phones featuring voice recorder capability, manufacturers should take extra care to ensure that these features cannot easily be exploited by malware to record conversations and then beam the recordings to a snoop. Then there is the surprising fact that not one of the more than 300 forms of mobile malware released as yet exploits programming bugs or security design flaws to insert itself into a vulnerable machine. This has long been a standard modus operandi for many PC viruses and Trojans. So far, mobile malware writers have instead relied exclusively on social engineering. In other words, tricking users into actively allowing installation of the malicious program on their phones. Some camouflage themselves as useful utilities or desirable games. But some, especially ones like Kabir and ComWarrior that spread via Bluetooth, do not. Many people accept the files even when the device warns of the security risk and gives them a chance to refuse the foreign software. I and other researchers have asked people victimized by such viruses, "Why did you click yes?" The common answer is that they did not at first. They chose no. But then the question immediately reappeared on the screen. A worm, you see, does not take no for an answer, and it gives the user no time to hit the menu option to disable Bluetooth. Unfortunately, even the newest versions of most smartphones permit the kind of Bluetooth harassment that effectively denies a person use of a phone until the individual accepts the file transfer, or until the user walks out of range of whatever infected device is sending the request, although few people realize they have this option. Staying a step ahead. The only hope of stopping mobile malware before it seriously degrades the utility and value of smartphones is quick and concerted action on the part of all concerned. Antivirus software now available from many companies can immunize and disinfect smartphones. Yet, few customers have installed such protection. That needs to change. Phones should also incorporate firewall software that warns the user when a program on the phone seizes the initiative to open an internet connection. This is an especially important form of protection for smartphones that can connect to Wi-Fi, also called 802.11 networks, and thus directly to the public internet. Many cellular companies aggressively filter traffic on the GPRS or UMTS data networks that their mobile devices use. Open Wi-Fi networks have no such protection. And while some carriers already filter their MMS streams to remove messages bearing malicious attachments, all should do so. Some of the biggest phone manufacturers have joined the Trusted Computing Group, which has been hammering out industry standards for microcircuitry inside phones that will make it harder for malware to get at sensitive data in the device's memory, or to hijack its payment mechanisms. And Symbian recently released a new version of its operating system that does an improved job of protecting key files, and that requires software authors to obtain digital certificates from the company. The new Symbian system refuses to install programs not accompanied by a certificate. Unless disabled by a user, the system effectively excludes all mobile malware discovered to date. Governments could also play a more constructive role than they have so far. Even though most countries have passed laws against hacking both ordinary computers and the computers inside cell phones, enforcement is lax or non-existent in most of the world. Many of the nations hit hardest so far by mobile malware outbreaks, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, do not always collect reliable and timely statistics that could be helpful for tracking software crimes. For our part, my team and others in the security research community have been proactively studying Symbian and Pocket PC, looking for vulnerabilities in the code and in the system designs that might afford entree to malware. We hope to find these holes so that they can be patched before the bad guys exploit them in the inevitable next round of this constant battle. Originally published, Scientific American 295, Volume 5, 70-77, November 2006. The Ultimate Database by Simpson L. Garfinkel. A few years ago, I bought a latte at Starbucks on the way to the airport, parked my car, and got on a flight for the UK. 8 hours later, I got off at Heathrow, bought a prepaid chip for my cell phone, and went to buy a ticket for the train into London, when my credit card gave up the ghost and refused to work anymore. Not until I got back to the U.S. did I find out what had happened. Apparently, the small purchase at Starbucks, followed by the overseas purchase of the cell phone card, had tripped some kind of anti-fraud data mining algorithm in my credit card company's computer. It tried to call me, got my voicemail, and proceeded to blacklist my credit card. What I found so exasperating about the entire experience was that the computer should have known that the person using my card in England was me. After all, I had bought my plane ticket with that same card and had flown with a major U.S. carrier. Aren't all those databases supposed to be tied together? Most people probably assume they are. We have come to expect, from Hollywood films such as Enemy of the State and the Jason Bourne trilogy, that shadowy organizations have instant access to all the databases we rely on, and with a few keystrokes can spy on our every movement. The process of collecting information from multiple sources and merging it, known as data fusion, is supposed to create an information resource that is more powerful, more flexible, and more accurate than any of the original sources. Proponents of data fusion say that their systems let organizations make better use of the data they already have. Critics say that fusion threatens civil liberties by using information in ways that were never envisioned when it was first collected. Both sides assume that data fusion systems actually work. The reality is that the systems are nowhere nearly as omniscient, as reliable, or as well developed as many people think. Out of many, one. The technology of data fusion can trace its heritage back to the computerized matching programs of the 1970s. When Congress passed the Privacy Act in 1974, it also authorized the creation of the Federal Parent Locator Service, which now operates a giant blacklist, denying a wide range of federal benefits such as passports to non-custodial parents who are behind on their child support. Those data are fused with the National Directory of New Hires to find recently employed parents who are not up to date on their payments so that their wages can be garnished. The term data fusion entered the technical vernacular in 1984, when researchers at Lockheed Martin's Advanced Technology Center published 2 articles about a tactical data fusion system that would meld battlefield information from sensors, databases, and other sources in real time for human analysts. Since then, the idea has blossomed. Bioinformatics investigators speak of genomic data fusion. The Department of Homeland Security has spent more than $250 million setting up some 58 state or local fusion centers. Nielsen, the consumer marketing company, has developed data fusion products for identifying and targeting potential customers with specific characteristics, rather than wasting effort on the traditional scattershot approach to marketing. But although data fusion has many faces, its use in identifying potential terrorists has stirred the greatest public debate. The key to detecting terrorists is to look for patterns of activity indicative of terrorist plots based on observation of current plots and past terrorist attacks, wrote Rear Admiral John Poindexter and Robert L. Popp of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, in 2006. They argued that the World Trade Center bombing of 1993 and the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995 might have been prevented if the government could have scanned commercial databases for large purchases of fertilizer by non-farmers. But getting those purchase records and combining them with a database of farm ownership and employment records would have required unprecedented government access to private computer systems. Every transaction, and thus every person in the country, would have been monitored without probable cause. For these reasons, among others, Congress killed Poindexter and Popp's research program, the Total Information Awareness Project, in 2003. Do not fold, spindle, or mash. A wall of government secrecy does nothing to allay civil libertarians' fears. Agencies have revealed little about the data fusion systems that they may or may not have deployed to protect national security. They argue that the bad guys would have an easier time evading fusion programs if they knew how they work. But enough information is publicly available to indicate that data fusion poses more than just ethical and legal problems. It also raises technical issues. Data quality is one. Much of the information in databases was originally collected for purely statistical purposes and may not be accurate enough to make automated judgments with potentially punitive outcomes. In 1994, Roger Clark of the Australian National University in Canberra studied computerized matching programs maintained by federal and state governments in the U.S. and Australia. These systems scanned millions of records and flagged thousands of potential hits. But most turned out to be false positives. For example, one program for finding welfare cheats matched the employment records of the Department of Health and Human Services against the welfare rolls of the counties surrounding Washington, D.C. It generated roughly 1,000 hits, but further investigation showed that 3/4 of the people identified were innocent. The benefits did not justify the costs of collecting data, training personnel, and chasing down the false positives. Many people feel that if a data fusion program could anticipate and stop a major terrorist attack, it would be worth whatever it cost. Poindexter, a career naval officer, compared the technical problems to finding an enemy submarine in the vastness of the ocean. But finding the signatures of terrorist preparations in an ocean of data is much harder than finding subs in an ocean of water. The world's oceans may be huge, but every spot can be uniquely identified by latitude, longitude, and depth. The data oceans are not so easily categorized. Moreover, the world's seas are not doubling in size every few years, as the data oceans are. Much of information space is unmapped. Data are spread across millions of individual computer systems, many hidden or otherwise unknown to the authorities. Fusion is hard because we are drowning in data from a multitude of sources, all with different levels of detail and uncertainty. The real challenge in data fusion is not getting the data, but making sense of them. What's on your hard drive? A good way to understand the data fusion problem is to start with the information on the hard drive of your computer. Between 1998 and 2005, I did just that. I purchased more than 1,000 used hard drives on eBay at small computer stores and at swap meets. I even scavenged some from computers left abandoned on street corners. In January 2003, Avi Shalat, now a computer scientist at the University of Virginia, and I published a paper detailing what we found. About a third of the drives were no longer functional, and another third had been properly wiped before being discarded. But the remaining third were a jackpot of personal information: email messages, memoranda, financial records. One drive had previously been part of an automatic teller machine and recorded thousands of credit card numbers. Another had been used by a supermarket to submit credit card payments to its bank. Neither drive had been properly wiped before being resold on the open market. The tools that enabled me to search the drives are widely available and not particularly sophisticated. Police departments around the world use the same kinds of tools to recover files from computers and cell phones. Sometimes users are unaware of the digital breadcrumbs they leave. Consider the case of the so-called BTK killer who committed 8 murders in Wichita, Kansas in the 1970s and 1980s, then went underground. The killer resurfaced in March 2004, sending a letter to the Wichita Eagle detailing his earlier crimes in a floppy disk with a Microsoft Word document on it to a local television station. The file contained metadata that linked it to a computer at a local church. Police discovered that the person who had used it was president of the Congregation Council and the killer. Making a hash of the files. But figuring out which documents are important and which are worthless is difficult and requires fusing outside knowledge with the information on the hard drive. For example, when I started analyzing hard drives back in the 1990s, many of them contained copies of the Island Hopper News. It seemed highly suspicious. Then I learned that this electronic newspaper was actually a demo file distributed by Microsoft with a product called Visual Studio 6.0. Had I been unaware, I might have drawn spurious conclusions about the drive's previous owners. The only way to screen out innocent files is to sample the world of digital documents and build a list of those that are widely available. One fast, automated way to do so is to create a so-called hash set. Cryptographic hash algorithms can assign a unique electronic fingerprint to any digital file. Two of the most popular are MD5, which creates a 128-bit fingerprint, and SHA-1, which generates a fingerprint 160 bits long. Then, instead of comparing two files byte by byte, forensics tools can examine the fingerprints. Supported by a grant from the Department of Justice, the National Software Reference Library and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, acquires software from hundreds of publishers and reduces every file to a cryptographic hash. NIST then distributes the database, which now has more than 46 million entries, to give forensic investigators a quick and reliable way of purging files that have been distributed by software publishers, files such as the Island Hopper News, and can therefore be safely ignored. Databases available from other federal agencies include e-fingerprints of computer hacker tools and of child pornography. But despite their utility, hash databases represent only a small sampling of all the documents out there. To augment them, I developed a technique called cross-drive analysis. It can automatically piece together information scattered across thousands of hard drives, USB memory sticks, and other data sources. The technique highlights and isolates identifiers such as email addresses and credit card numbers, and weights them according to how frequently they appear. Presumably, the more common the identifier, the less important it is. Finally, the technique correlates the identifiers across all the individual devices. If an email address or credit card number appears on only 2 disk drives among thousands, there is a good chance that those 2 drives are related. Who's who? Yet another problem for data fusers is identity. In the electronic world, there may be dozens of people sharing the same name and dozens of names used by the same person. Some databanks may list Poindexter as John Marlin Poindexter or J.M. Poindexter, or even misspell the Rear Admiral's last name, Poindexter. A person's first name may be listed in one database as Robert, in another as Rob, and in a third as Bob. A person whose Arabic name is transliterated Haj Imemed Othmani Abdirakib in West Africa might be known as Haj Mohammed Uthman Abdid al-Rajib in Iraq. Matching up the various names and account numbers that inhabit the electronic world with physical bodies is called identity resolution. Without it, data fusion is impossible. Curiously, a great deal of innovation in identity resolution systems has been driven by casinos in Las Vegas. Under Nevada law, casinos are required to bar self-declared problem gamblers from playing their games. These gamblers voluntarily place their names on a list, saying, in effect, "Don't let me gamble again." But gambling can be an illness, and some people on the list still try to sneak in by changing their name or swapping a few numbers and their birth date. Casinos are also determined to exclude suspected or convicted cheaters. And if a guest is winning large sums at the blackjack table, a casino wants to make sure that the dealer and the player are not roommates. Accordingly, casinos have funded development of a technique called non-obvious relationship analysis, NORA, which combines identity resolution with databases of credit companies, public records, and hotel stays. A NORA system, for instance, might discover that the blackjack dealer's wife once lived in the same apartment building as the player who just won $100,000. In the 1990s, software engineer Jeff Jonas developed a system that could match the names in a casino's computers with other sources of information in a way that tolerates error, ambiguity, and uncertainty. The system works by building hypotheses based on the data and then revising these hypotheses as new information becomes available. For example, it might receive a driver's license record for a Mark R. Smith, a credit report for a Randall Smith, and a credit application for a Mark Randy Smith. It might guess that the names belong to the same person, particularly if Mark R. Smith and Mark Randy Smith have the same driver's license number, and if Randall Smith and Mark Randy Smith share a phone number. But suppose new data show that Randy Smith Sr. shares the birth date of Randall Smith, but that his Social Security number differs from that of Mark R. Smith. Now, the system might revise its guess, deciding that Mark R. Smith is Randall Smith Jr., whereas Randy Smith is Randall Smith Sr. The key to making all this work is programming the system so that it never confuses original data with a conclusion inferred from those data. Jonas sold the system and his company to IBM in 2005. Since then, IBM has added a feature called anonymous resolution. Two organizations can determine whether they share the name of one person in their respective databases without sharing the names of all the people who do not match. The technique works by comparing cryptographic hashes instead of real names. Privacy advocates still maintain that hashes, cross-drive analysis, anonymous resolution, and the like do little to overcome their fundamental objections. After all, these systems still use personal information for purposes other than the ones for which it was originally acquired. They also make it routine to sweep up private data in a dragnet, regardless of whether the people involved are suspected of committing a crime. Yet these systems generate significantly fewer false positives than did those developed in the 1980s. At some point, the social benefits may come to outweigh the privacy costs of having a computer snoop through people's records. Putting it all together. So just how well do fusion systems actually work? Data quality remains a serious problem. Pull your credit report from each of the nation's 3 major credit reporting agencies, for instance, and each report will probably contain errors and inconsistencies. Those data can lie dormant for years without causing much trouble. The danger arises when some newfangled algorithm reads too much into the inconsistencies. Even when data are accurate, relationships brought to light by comparing databases may have real meaning or may be purely coincidental, as inevitable as finding 2 people in a room who share the same birthday. Maybe the 4 people who meet once a week to take a long drive are planning a crime. Then again, they may belong to a softball team and travel together to each week's big game. Society's expectations for data fusion may be unreasonably high. If terrorists blend in with the population, human investigators and computers alike will be hard-pressed to find them. Most systems of data mining and fusion have some kind of sensitivity adjustment. Move the slider to the left and the system fails to find genuine matches. Move it to the right and the system makes too many predictions that turn out to be wrong. Where should the slider be set? If a system flags every 3rd airline passenger, it will be more likely to spot a real terrorist, but it will also bring air traffic to a standstill and overwhelm law enforcement. If a data fusion system does not work as desired, its algorithms could be fundamentally flawed. But the problem could also be a dearth of data. Likewise, if the system is performing well, giving it more data might make it perform even better. In other words, the people building and using these systems are naturally inclined to want more and more input data, no matter how well the systems are working. Thus, data fusion projects have a built-in tendency toward mission creep, to the consternation not only of civil liberties advocates, but also of those footing the bill. In his 1994 article, Clark concluded that trade-offs between the state's interest in social control and individual citizens' interest in freedom from unreasonable interference are being consistently resolved in favor of the state. What makes the public debate over data fusion so frustrating to me as a scientist is the fact that so little information has been publicly released about data fusion systems in actual use. It harkens back to the cryptography debates of the 1990s, when the U.S. government argued that there were good reasons for legally restricting the use of cryptography, but that those reasons were so sensitive that discussing them in public would be a threat to national security. I suspect a similar debate is brewing over the government's use of data fusion, not to mention the applications of this powerful technology in business and even in political activities. It is a debate well worth having and having in public. Originally published, Scientific American 299, Volume 3, 82 to 87, September 2008.